Well, Easter at church, at least, is always an exciting day. Like, I always looked forward to Easter. When I was a kid, I don't know what you looked forward to, but like one of my favorite things that I looked forward to was dyeing Easter eggs. And so today, as I told you, we were deviating from Ezra. We're going to look at a passage in Matthew, and we're going to talk about the invitations of the resurrection. There are two invitations of the resurrection. And so when I was a kid, I loved dyeing Easter eggs. That wasn't, I don't know when the last time I saw kids do that. Like, maybe toxic or something. I don't know. I have no idea. Now everything's plastic and they put candy inside, but I grew up with the prize was you got to eat the egg and the egg yolk, right? That was the prize. Won't no candy coming up in the house. And but I looked forward to that. Like there were other things that I looked forward to. Maybe we always had Easter outfits. How many of you had Easter outfits? Okay, I got a new suit every Easter. My favorite one that I ever got was a yellow suit. If you can imagine that my hair was fire. Matter of fact, I think we got a picture. Yeah, my fire engine red hair. And my dad must have been letting us go to hell or something because my hair was touching my ears, which was unheard of in my house. Like, when I see that picture, I'm just amazed. The thing that bothers me most about this picture is that my mom and dad are about the same age as my kids right now. Right? That bothers me. And if y'all have never seen a beehive, that's a beehive right there, okay? That my mom wore a beehive, I don't know, till she couldn't. I don't know. That's what I grew up with. But I like that yellow suit there. It don't look yellow in that picture, does it? But it was yellow. And if you can imagine me with my translucent white skin and my fire engine red hair and a yellow suit, like you could have seen me 4 blocks away. But we always got an Easter outfit, and it may be a Southern thing, but people used to buy corsages on Easter. Anybody else remember Easter? Okay, all right. I just wanted to make sure. So, and I see some people from the North raising their hands, so it must not just be a Southern thing. People buy corsages on Easter and boutonnieres, and they would wear them to church, like that was a bigger deal. When I first got my first job, I sold shoes for Kenny's Shoe Store. And they're no longer in business. And but I love to sell stuff, and we worked on commission, so I got minimum wage plus commission. And here was the deal. I got 1% commission on every pair of shoes I sold, but if I added an accessory to it, like a purse or some shoe cleaner, it went up to 6% for the whole sale. So, they teach you, like when somebody sells you shoes, I'm telling y'all some secrets now if you don't know. There's like this, we couldn't show up to put shoes on somebody without bringing shoe cleaner and a purse that would match or something else that would go along with it, because that was what we were supposed to do. The margins were higher on those items. And at Easter time, like you couldn't help the customers fast enough. Like they were buying shoes, patent leather shoes, all kind of colors. We had every color you could imagine, and we were fitting the whole family up with matching shoes, and the dads were getting shoes and the sons were getting shoes, and it was like, I loved it. I don't know if Jesus rose from the dead, but I was making money. So that was something that I was associated with Easter about. I saw churches start selling chocolate Easter eggs. That came along in my early adulthood, that I remember seeing churches do that. And then, other things begin to happen. And for some of you, like Easter is marked. You can take that picture down. Don't nobody want to see it anymore. But there are other things that maybe marked your Easter tradition. Maybe it was Holy Week services. It could have been a Good Friday service. Many churches have sunrise services. You're going to have family gatherings. A lot of the reason why some of you are at this service is because you're going to have a family gathering. We'll have one at our house this afternoon. And so lots of different things mark Easter for people, and they're the thing that people look forward to. But the reality is, Easter is about one thing. It's about the resurrection of Jesus Christ. That is what we celebrate when we get together at Easter. And it's easy to get that put out of our minds and not think about that because we're so busy planning, because spring break happens around this time and we're taking our kids on trips, and I'm going to take my grandkids off this week, and we're trying to buy outfits and plan for lunch and get everybody together and who's going to be there. And we are stressed out and we forget that Easter really is about the resurrection. And it's an interesting thing. You see, there is some debate, not a lot, but there's some debate about whether Jesus was actually a person or not. There's a conversation that people would have that would say, no, Jesus never really existed, or maybe he did. There's enough history that tells us Jesus lived that most people won't argue with it about it, but there are some people who would debate with you and say Jesus never lived at all. There's no one that I'm aware of that will debate with you about whether Jesus died. That's not really a debate. Everybody would say, yeah, Jesus lived and Jesus also died. Even the people who don't believe as we believe, they might would agree with you that Jesus lived and that Jesus died. The distinguishing factor for believers and followers of Christ and Christians, might be the way we would say it today, is the fact that he rose again. That's where the real debate begins to happen, is did Jesus really rise again? There's a lot of conversations that you can have about it, you see, because individual experiences kind of fall flat. If just one person tells you, I saw something or I experienced something, so like I'm almost scared to say this out loud, but I told my wife, and I'm the only one that saw it, and I have no idea like what it was. But I was stretching in the backyard the other day, and I was laying on my back, stretching my legs. So I'm looking up, it was a clear day, and this jet came over. You can see on a clear day, you can see the jet plume behind it, and so it was a commercial jet. It had two plumes behind it, and I'm always fascinated. One of the things I'll do is count how many jets I can see in the sky at one particular time. The most I've ever gotten to is 15 here, like in Edenton. They fly over here for lots of different reasons, but it was interesting to see. But then, like, as it was passing, it's a pretty slow speed. It's at a much higher altitude. The flight path also for the life flight from the hospital goes almost directly over my house. So if somebody's being life flighted, it goes almost directly over my house, and I hear it, and I will often stop to pray. But some other object at a lower altitude came underneath that airplane, and it was big. It was bigger than the airplane to my eye, but I don't know how far in the sky it was, and it was moving faster than the airplane. And I'm trying to get my phone out because I want to take a picture of it. I don't know what it was. I'm not from a state that believes in UFOs, so I don't. You can take that for whatever it means. I have no idea what it was, but it was one of those things. Like, I saw it, I have no idea what it was, and I don't know how to explain it. And if I sat here and tried to tell you that it was something extraterrestrial, y'all would look at me like you wouldn't listen to anything else I had to say, right? Because it's just me, and it's just my experience. The thing about the resurrection is that it's not just a single person's experience. You see, lots of cults have people who have singular experiences. There are lots of people who have had singular spiritual experiences, but the resurrection is something that is witnessed by multiple people. There's at least one place that records that over 500 people saw Jesus at one time. And so throughout history, we can look back and see that these were eyewitnesses to the resurrection that point us to that fact. And so today, that's what we're going to talk about. That is the thing that sets Christianity apart. We don't believe the person we follow just died. There's not a tomb that has a body in it for us to go look at. There's an empty tomb for us to go celebrate, but we believe Jesus rose again, and that's what I want to talk to you today about, the two invitations of the resurrection. You see, I think there are two invitations when we first see the resurrection story told in Matthew that are pointed out to us. The first one is for people who aren't sure, people who are just looking, people who haven't believed, or maybe they believed and just have found themselves in a spot that they're not sure about what's happening in life right at this particular moment. All of us have been there. We all started in the first invitation. And then the second invitation is for people who do believe, people who have experienced the resurrection, and there's an obligation on our part. So here's the first invitation. The first invitation is this, an invitation to see it. There's an old saying that says seeing is believing, and to a certain degree that is true. And though our eyes may deceive us, we are most likely to believe things that we see. We're most likely to latch on to things that we can point to, touch, and feel. The interesting thing with Jesus is that he had repeatedly said, I'm going to die and I'm going to rise again. And he said it multiple ways. Like he said, this temple's going to be torn down, but in 3 days I'll rebuild it. He talks about as Jonah was 3 days in the belly of the whale, so will the Son of Man be in the heart of the earth. There are multiple ways Jesus says, I'm going to die and I am going to rise again. And it's one thing to hear somebody say it's going to happen. It's a different thing for us to experience it and understand it for ourselves. Saying something spectacular is going to happen, and then seeing something spectacular actually happen are different. Matthew 28 records, it's the first recording of the resurrection. It's his account, and it says this. It says, early on Sunday morning, as the new day was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went out to visit the tomb. Suddenly there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven, rolled aside the stone, and sat on it. His face shone like lightning, and his clothes was as white as snow. The guards shook with fear when they saw him, and they fell into a dead faint. Then the angel spoke to the women. Don't be afraid, he said. I know you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He isn't here. He is risen from the dead, just as he said would happen. Come, see where his body was lying. And now go quickly, tell his disciples that he is risen from the dead and he is going ahead of you to Galilee. You will see him there. Remember what I have told you. Matthew's account is interesting in that it would make us believe that the women were there when the earthquake happened and the angel came down and the stone was rolled away. The other three gospels would tell us that's not exactly how it happened, or at least that's their accounting of it. Matthew doesn't explicitly say they were there, but it lends itself to believe, okay, they were there and this earthquake happened and the guards fainted and the angel spoke to the women. The other three tell us a little different story, that one of the things they're worried about when they are on the way to the tomb is who's going to roll the stone away for us. And when they get there, the stone's rolled away in the other gospel accounts. And so we understand that they show up after the fact, after Jesus has risen from the dead, after the stone has been rolled away. And it says the guards were afraid, or they shook with fear, and they fell into a dead faint. There are probably a lot of reasons the guards are afraid. They're afraid of the angel. And notice the angel doesn't tell the guards, don't be afraid. Why? Because he wanted them to be afraid, right? You know my theory about angels. The reason why they say don't be afraid is because they are scary. They're not 3-year-old Jane with a piece of wire over her head and some tinsel. That's not what they're mighty warriors. They're battle creatures. They often carry swords. Like when you read the scripture, these are you should be afraid. And if you see an angel and it says don't be afraid, you should be afraid. If you see an angel and it says don't be afraid, you should still be afraid. Right? I would be. And so they're afraid of the angel. They're also afraid of the Roman government. They're afraid of the rulers because they had one job, right? One. You ever met the people that had one job and then they failed? right? They had one job, make sure the stone doesn't get rolled away. And it does, so they're afraid they're going to die. And it says they passed out on the spot, fell into a dead faint. I would love to know if they were still laying there when the women showed up. Like that I would just be curious. Like, we don't have that. I'm just curious, like, if the women showed up and said, like, what happened to them? You know, did somebody kill them? Did somebody knock them out? Take Jesus? You know, and then the angel speaks. The angel doesn't speak to the guards, but he does speak to the women. And the reason why is the guards are at the tomb out of duty. The women are there out of faith and relationship. And the angel says 7 things to the women. I'm only going to talk about 2 of them. The 7 things the angel says is, don't be afraid. I know who you're looking for. He isn't here. He has risen. Come and see. Go and tell. Remember what I have told you. He says, come and see. He says, come and see, to 2 women who are unsure of what's happening. We can make all we want to out of this story, that the women were there to see a resurrected Savior. But if they were there to see a resurrected Savior, they wouldn't have brought spices and herbs. They wouldn't have brought frankincense and myrrh or whatever they were going to put on the body. They wouldn't have brought that. They came looking for a dead body. They were there out of their relationship with Jesus, showing what little bit of faith that they had, that maybe something spectacular could happen. But they come prepared to take care of a dead body. And this is, in my opinion, one of the things that makes Christianity so believable. The fact that women were the first ones on the scene, and 2, that men admitted that women. Right? Like, and y'all laugh just in the context of today's history, okay? But if you go back 2,000 years ago and you read in the Jewish context, they weren't even allowed to speak, right? They just keep your mouth shut, right? That was kind of the rule. Don't tell it. And so the invitation here is for them to be able to come and see. And it's not that they hadn't experienced some miracles with Jesus. Mary Magdalene, the scripture tells us, had 7 demons driven out of her by Jesus. Mary, the mother of Jesus, should be one of these, okay? And so she shows up. She had faith enough to believe before Jesus was born that she had conceived a child of the Holy Spirit. And God had said she is highly favored. Yet she comes to the tomb expecting him still to be dead. Can I tell you something? Grief and heartache and brokenness and distress will do some strange things to us. It will cause us in moments where we have believed previously to doubt now. And I suspect that many of you find yourself at times in those situations where you once believed, you were able to trust God in this situation, but now you're in a different situation. Your life is broken. Things have happened. You're grieving the loss of a loved one, something difficult that you're going through. And you look around and you go, I'm just not sure God still cares. You see, the invitation here to these wavering believers at the tomb is the same invitation that we have today. Come and see. That invitation is the same to the same people. Because if we're honest, we have moments where we waver in our faith. We have moments where we question whether God is actually real. And Jesus is constantly inviting us, come and see. The invitation that has to the person who has all the reason to be skeptical. Maybe you're in this room today and you're an unbeliever and you have all kinds of questions and you're so skeptical about whether this is real or whether it's not real. The invitation from Jesus is just come and see. The invitation is also to the believer who has experienced circumstances that have shattered their faith and they're crushed and they're looking around wondering, is this for me? Does God still have room for me? Is the resurrection still for me? Is for the one who thinks they believe, but they cannot see how it's going to happen. The invitation is still the same to everyone today. Come and see. An invitation to see it. The second invitation is this. It's an invitation to tell it. There's nobody that loves to tell a good story better than I do. But sometimes I get a hold of a story and I go, I cannot tell that because no one will believe it. Right? If I share this, if I try to tell people this, they're going to go, you have lost your mind. It doesn't really matter what your experience is. Sometimes it is so good, so spectacular, or so bad and so difficult that you just don't believe anybody's going to take your word for it. It's one thing to have an experience. It's another thing to be able to put it into context and tell people where they will believe it and understand it. And the angel tells them, he says, go and tell, and don't forget what I've told you to tell them. And it says this, it says, the women ran quickly from the tomb. They were very frightened, but also filled with great joy. They rushed to give the disciples the angel's message, and as they went, Jesus met them and greeted them, and they ran to him, grasped his feet, and worshiped him. Then Jesus said to them, don't be afraid. Go tell my brothers to leave for Galilee, and they will see me there. The women ran quickly, it says. This is an act of faith. They leave to tell the story. They leave to tell a story. I have to believe these women leave to tell a story that they are not sure anybody's going to believe when they tell it. Right? Because, let's be honest, if you read like John's account, they don't believe it. They're very skeptical. And when they hear the message, and even after they see the tomb, they walk away, unsure what has happened, pondering the things that they have seen. And there's this distinct disadvantage that they have as women to go and tell the story. And it says this, something very, very important. It says they were frightened, but also filled with great joy. There are some well-meaning Christians that would tell you, you should not have fear. I just don't even think that's biblical. There's several passages I could point to. One says, work out your own salvation in fear and trembling, right? Yeah. So it's there. It tells you that you should, right? There are some situations where it's necessary that it's present and the words get translated. Yeah, that's what it says. It says that the fear of God is what? The beginning of wisdom. Right? There are multiple places I can point to that tell you, like, you should have some at least reverential fear in your life that you understand. It says they were frightened and filled with great joy. The best example I could give you this is having a baby. Right? You're scared to death and excited at the same time. Some of you women right now are scared. Like, I'm afraid he's going to speak it into existence. No, that's not what I'm doing. Like, you're frightened and you're filled with joy. All at the same time. You're frightened. You want everything to go well. You don't want anybody to suffer. You want the baby to be healthy. Like, all of those things. But you're excited that you're going to be a mother or a father and the new life that is going to bring all of those things go together. And so if somebody tells you you can't have joy and fear at the same time, they've never had a child and never been around. Listen, there have been times God has moved me to do some things. I was scared to death and excited at the same time. If you've never been scared to death and excited at the same time, you've probably never taken a step of faith. I would tell you at times you're going to be scared to death and excited. And it's what it says they were filled with great joy and they were frightened at the same time. It says, but they rushed to give the disciples the message. And on the way, remember now, the angel says, go to Galilee and Jesus will meet you there. But because they were obedient and started on the way, Jesus shows up right where they are. You see, that's the beauty of being obedient to Christ. That's the beauty of doing what he's asked you to do. That's the beauty of going and telling it. There are some things that will happen in your life only when you open your mouth and you share what God has done in your life. The minute that you're obedient, suddenly things happen that you hadn't expected. Not only, right, are they the first ones to see the empty tomb, they're the first ones to encounter a risen Lord. What a powerful testimony to have, but I believe they received that because they are obedient. He says, go and tell. And the message is the same to us today. If you don't believe, if you're worried about whether it is for you, if you're worried if there's enough room in the tomb for you to see Jesus, he's inviting you, come and see. But after you've seen it, the invitation is singular. As a matter of fact, when you want to know what somebody really believes and what is important to them, you find out what they said just before they're gone. And the last words that we have recorded from Jesus is to go and tell. We call it the Great Commission. That's the last thing Jesus said to us before he sends into heaven. Go and tell. And so I have two invitations today. It's very simple. If you're here and you don't believe, if you're here and you're not sure, if you're here and your faith has been crushed and shattered and life doesn't look, come and see. That's my invitation to you today. If you're here and you're a believer and you believe Jesus Christ is risen from the dead and you know what he's done in your life, don't keep it a secret. Go and tell. The problem, though, that happens is that sometimes we come into this room and we hear the preacher preach. And we think, that's easy for you to say. You're saying, go and tell. But you don't know what it's like to come and see. I guess probably half the Easters I've told this same story. But for some reason, the last month and a half, I've been in 4 or 5 one-on-one conversations with people who are new to the church. And they ask me, how long have you been pastor? No, or how long have you been at Open Door? That's a complicated question. You see, because 18 years ago today on Easter Sunday, I walked in this room for the very first time. Not as pastor, not as a preacher, not as a leader. I walked in as somebody who had believed but was broken and trying to figure out if there was room for me at the tomb. Trying to figure out if there was the resurrection reached far enough to cover my brokenness and my sin and my struggles. I sat on the very back row, right about where the sound booth is, and cried the entire time. Because the only thing I wanted to know is, was it good enough for me where I was right then? You see, because the goal of the enemy is to make us believe that we have gone too far, life's too bad, things are too broken, we're too destroyed, our faith is too small, that God doesn't have room for us anymore. Here's my promise to you. He does. You're not too broken. You're not too far gone. Life's not too shattered. You haven't run so far that you can't get your way back. He's saying, come and see. Just come and see. And that's my invitation to you today. Come and see.